Howdy y'all. People have been trying to play Super Mario Bros. On the go for decades now. The old way just wasn't very practical. But after so many years, we're finally able to play the game portably. Ignore this. A few years after that, we would have a new way to play the game, and ignore these two. Nintendo would finally release a fourth way to play this classic game on the go, via the Super Mario Bros. Game&Watch. Okay, let's rewind for a second. Back in the early 80s, Nintendo had a series of LCD games under the name Game&Watch. It was their first ever step into portable gaming, a market that the company would soon be dominating for ever. The Game&Watch games are certainly basic by today's standards, and even at the time they weren't exactly cutting-edge technology, but they were what they needed to be: fun. They were simple, fun games that didn't try to be anything more than what they were. Nintendo would release different Game & Watch titles through the 80s, though they were, unfortunately, although understandably, discontinued shortly after the release of the Game Boy. But even to this day, original Game & Watch games are highly collectible. Look them up on eBay right now, you'll be lucky to find a model that isn't selling for around $100. People want to get their hands on this relatively obscure piece of Nintendo history, and it looks like Nintendo themselves realized this, and decided to try to capitalize on it. So, in 2020, to coincide with Mario's 35th anniversary, Nintendo released this, a brand new Game & Watch that included the first two Super Mario games, alongside the very first Game & Watch game as well. Now, before we get into the actual game aspect of this device, let's see how it fares in being a watch. It tells the time, and I can carry it around with me like a pocket watch. And with some slight modding, I can make this my new wristwatch. You can change the background by clicking the time button. Mario runs around, constantly going left to right, only to wrap right back round to where he started, always jumping up to update the clock every time a minute passes. And every hour on the hour, a small group of Yoshis will appear to help the plumber out. It's all very cute and quaint, and there are several Easter eggs to be found here. One I want to point out is whenever the clock reaches 9:13 AM or PM, Mario will go down the pipe and play out a little boss fight with Bowser. This happens because September the 13th was the day Super Mario Bros. First released in Japan. I can respect a cute little nod like that. Overall, the watch aspect of this Game & Watch is exactly what it needs to be. A cute little timepiece with Mario and company running around. So, time for me to nitpick. Why isn't there a way to set an alarm? If you look back on the original Game & Watch lineup, a lot of the releases there had an alarm feature. It seems like such a weird thing to omit here. It would have been the perfect place to include another unique animation for whenever the alarm goes off. Also, just the fact that alarms are such a basic feature to include in digital watches. I'm honestly kind of baffled that it's not here. Now that I'm thinking about it, this thing could have had a stopwatch, a timer, or hey, a setting for military time. Any of those options would have been simple to implement, but nope, this watch just tells the time. Nothing more, nothing less. Because if it was anything less, it would have just been an animation loop. Another thing I would have liked if there was a setting to have this thing continuously running. After 3 minutes, it turns off and goes into sleep mode. To be fair though, it does stay on if you leave it charging, so that's really just a minor complaint. Now, that's all I really have to say about the watch. Now, let's get to the game aspect of this device. You gotta be kidding me. It includes the original Super Mario Bros., its disowned sequel, and a version of the very first Game & Watch game, Ball. 3 games. Okay, before I start ranting about that, let's go over how these games feel on here. I'm gonna be positive for a moment, shield your ears. These games honestly feel great on this device. I haven't mentioned it yet, but easily the best part of this thing is its construction. It honestly feels premium in the hands. It has a surprisingly good D-pad on it, which Okay, I know that may seem like a weird thing to highlight, but have you used recent D-pads from Nintendo? They're all made with the idea that you would never use them because you have the analog stick right there. This one though honestly feels just as good as the D-pad on the original NES. In fact, the whole shape of the thing kinda mimics the old controller as well. Playing this thing feels a lot like holding on to the original controller. Now, I know that's probably unintentional. It is modeled after the original Game&Watches after all, but it is still a plus. It plays very well considering how small it is. It's half the size of the original cartridge. Heck, it's the same size of a Japanese copy of Super Mario. This is the game playing on a 50-inch television, and this is the Game&Watch. As far as I could tell, Super Mario is unchanged from the original NES version. The one little feature they added is that when you hold down A on the title screen, you start off the game with infinite lives. Amateurs, we get infinite lives the old-fashioned way in my house, thank you very much. Although, I have to imagine this feature was probably more so added for Mario 2, officially making this the most playable version of this unplayable game. This is amazing! Now I can play Super Mario outside, at work, while driving to work! It's really impressive that they play as well as they do given how small this thing is. Super Mario Bros. And Mario 2 and Ball feel great on this system. Ball here being slightly tweaked to include Mario here instead of Mr. Game&Watch. Ball is a neat enough game to kill some time on, and because you can control it with just the buttons on the right means you can play it with only one hand. Perfect for bathroom breaks. So yeah, I do have to give credit to this thing for being a surprisingly good way to play these older games. Speaking of which, time for me to get negative again. How did Nintendo think it was a good idea to only include 3 games on this thing? One of them being infamous for being one of, if not just straight up, the worst game in the Mario series. Like, come on, with a D-pad and 2 buttons, you could have included the first 3 Mario games, alongside the Mario Land titles on Game Boy. These games are the size of peanuts. There is no justifiable reason for including only 2 of the original games. Honestly, that's almost worse than if you had just included the first game alone. If it was just that, yeah, it would have been a bit lame, but it would have made more sense. Featuring the first Mario game and the first Game&Watch game in one neat little package. But no, you had to introduce the idea of it being a collection, and then simultaneously spit in your face by making Mario 2 be the only other game in said collection. If I didn't know any better, I would honestly say this was a bit of trolling on Nintendo's part. Oh, you want some games on here? You want some extra games? Yeah, you do. Here's your extra game, you filthy consumer. Seriously though, this thing should have at least included all of the NES Mario games. That would have helped in making it feel more like a package deal. Kinda like a portable version of All-Stars without the updated graphics. Hey, it could have also included Duck Hunt. That game is famous for being bundled with Super Mario Bros. It's a fun arcade-style game that would have been great to play portably. And looking at the Game&Watch lineup here, what is this? You built a dedicated device that's made to mimic a lineup of products that you haven't made for the better part of 4 decades, and you've only included 1 Game&Watch game on here? Again, there's just no way to justify that. This should have at least included the original 5 Game&Watch titles from their initial wave of release. Only including one of them here is just a slap in the face. Good lord, there's Game&Watch releases out there that directly feature Mario. How could you not release them on this dedicated Super Mario Bros. Game&Watch? You know, another thing that bugs me about Ball here is how it's presented. It's just mimicking the look of the original game, which is fine, but compare this to the Game&Watch Gallery collections that released on Game Boy. They also included a 1-to-1 recreation of the original releases, but alongside that, they also featured a remade version of the game with Mario characters. And it was always more than just one game on the card. The Game Boy collections included a handful of old titles on them. These releases were great. They're what this thing should have been. Comparing it to these old Game Boy games, it's hard to see this as anything other than just plain lazy. The lack of content on here is especially abhorrent when you consider the fact that this thing originally retailed for $50. To really put it into perspective just how bad of a deal that is, enter the NES Classic Edition. This little puppy featured 30, counted them, 30 classic NES games. 3 of them, obviously, being the trio of Mario games for the system. You know how much it retailed for? $60. A $10 difference for 27 more games. That's not even mentioning the absurdly charming interface of the NES Classic Edition, with some wonderful 8-bit style music, options to play your game in crisp HD or have a CRT filter over them, 4 save states alongside every game. You know, that's another thing I don't like about this device. The UI sucks. It's the most basic stock layout for selecting a different game or changing the settings for brightness or volume. There's no character or charm to it at all. It's almost laughable how much of a worse deal this is in comparison to the NES Classic Edition, or even the SNES Classic Edition for that matter. It's so objectively not worth its retail price that you don't even have to take my word for it. It has not kept its original value at all. This is a Mario product that was specifically made to be a collectible, that has only depreciated in value as the years have gone by. That's almost impressive. And, to be fair, it looks like Nintendo themselves realized they messed up here. Cause for their next Game&Watch release, which coincided with Zelda's 35th anniversary, it included 3 classic Zelda games on it, the original 2 that released on the NES, and Link's Awakening, featuring all Zelda games that you can play with just the D-pad and 2 buttons. Okay, well, it doesn't include the Oracle games, but most people forget about them, so it's okay. Also, it has a timer! The watch here isn't just a watch like it is on the Mario one. Okay, seriously though, just on the fact alone that it includes 3 Zelda games, which are a good bit longer than your average Mario title, makes this Game&Watch release much more worth its value than the Mario one. Now, is it worth the retail price of $50? I would still say no. It still only includes 1 Game&Watch game, and yeah, if you were to compare it to the NES Classic Edition, it's still laughable. But again, it's hard to deny that the Zelda Game&Watch just seems to have more effort put into it than the Mario one. And getting back to the Mario Game&Watch, at the end of the day, it's not a bad product, it's just a terribly overpriced one. At absolute most, this should have retailed for like $30. I think that would have been a fair price for a novelty like this. But at $50, it should have been so much more. Or at the very least, included much more. Oh wait, I nearly forgot to mention, look at what happens when you press this button on the side. It's my favorite feature! Thank y'all for watching all the way to the end, and until next time, goodbye y'all.